Hey, class. I wanted to redo the portion of the review on experts. There was a couple points that I failed to bring up, so I'm going to include it on a separate video here. But we want to take up these three questions here. What makes an expert an expert? Why we have a good reason to believe experts? The two principles that ought to guide us, right? In our judgments relating to experts. Well, an expert is a person who specializes in a particular subject area or discipline. We have good reason to believe experts because they have more information than we do, and they are better at judging that information than we are. They have a facility with the information because they've studied it for so long. They also have been trained how to evaluate the information of that kind. And so their judgments, are going to, um, be, are going to give us, they're going to be grounded in good reason, or they're going to. The judgments of experts are going to be things, which we have good reason to believe. If there is no, other reason, to call it into doubt, some of which, I'll go over here in just a second. But the two principles regarding experts are as follows. First, there is this principle that if there is a claim that conflicts with expert opinion, then we have good reason to doubt that claim. The second principle is if there are disagreements among the experts, about some claim, then we have good reason to doubt the claim. Take the issue of climate change. 97% of climate scientists believe that climate change is caused by humans. This was according to a study done by NASA. There really isn't any disagreement with regard to that issue, and so we have no reason for doubting it. Okay, and we do have reason for doubting, claims that conflict with it by the first principle. There's, a bunch of politicians and news outlets that are claiming that, all this stuff is natural, that climate change is not being driven by human beings. That claim conflicts with expert opinions, so we have a reason for doubting it. One more thing about experts, they're obviously experts aren't infallible. They may go wrong because of incompetency, right? That's one way that they might go wrong. Those principles hold only on the assumption, that we don't have reason for doubting that the expert, has gone wrong in some way, due to incompetence. Or another big one, right, is bias, right? If the expert, has a bias, say, they are paid by, some industry, to be a part of the study, through some think tank, then, there's probably some bias there, and we have reason for doubting, what the expert would claim. Okay, and also one fallacy that was introduced in this context, and that is the fallacy of appeal by authority. This is where an argument is grounded in somebody's expertise, but they really don't have, the qualifications in that area. So, for instance, if we were to ground an argument about ethics based on what Einstein said about ethics, he said that ethics ought to be grounded in sympathy and not reason. Okay, well, hey, look, this is Einstein, so it must be true, right? If an argument like that were made, then that would be a fallacy of appeal to unqualified authority because, Einstein doesn't have the appropriate expertise in that area, whereas he does have the expertise in physics. So, if we say, look, Einstein, said that space bends, so it must be the case that space bends. After all, Einstein said it. That's an argument from authority, and that would be a non-fallacious one that Einstein does have the appropriate expertise for that.